Hi there. In this video, we will create an ASP.NET Core 8 MVC application from scratch, and we will perform CRUD operations on a SQL Server database using Entity Framework Core. This will be a beginner-friendly application and tutorial. Let me take you through the app that we will create. We will create a new .NET 8 application from scratch using the MVC template. And in here, we will create multiple web pages to perform CRUD operations. So we want to create, read, update, and delete the students that we are creating in this application. So add student page will look like this. It will have a name, email, phone, and subscribed option. On saving this, we will redirect this user to the all students web page. So we have the students web page over here, which displays all the students that we have in the database. And this is a SQL Server database, and we are using Bootstrap to style our HTML. From here, we can see the edit buttons, which we can use to navigate to this particular student. For example, we can go over here and it displays or reveals more information about the student. For example, the phone number and the subscribed option. We can use this web page, which is the edit student web page, to change some information. And we can then save this information. It returns back to the list, and you can see this updated information again and again. Now, if you wish to delete this student, you can also make use of this delete button, which you can click and it will delete the student from the database and brings back to the updated list over here. I hope you will like this tutorial. If you do, please like and comment to show your love, and subscribe to the channel to see more content. I have created a folder for myself in which I will create my ASP.NET 8 MVC CRUD application. So you can create a folder for yourself and then open Visual Studio. Now, first thing we'll do after opening Visual Studio is to create a new project. So on the Get Started page, you can click on this button to create a new project. And from here, from the next page, you'll be asked to choose a template for it. Now, there are a lot of templates available from Visual Studio, but we'll be mostly interested in writing in C# language. So I'll select C# from here, and I'll also select web from here because I want to create a website. So I'll select that. And in here, I will now find a ASP.NET Core web application. I find one over here, but this is using Rage pages, but this video is for MVC. So I'll come down more and find ASP.NET Core web app, which is using model view controller. And it states that a project template for creating an ASP.NET Core application with example ASP.NET Core MVC views and controllers. This can also be used for RESTful HTTP services, but for our example, we are going to use it to create a web application. So I will select that and click on Next. From here, it is asking us to configure our new project. So I can give the project name, the solution name, and also where I want to store the project. So I have created the folder. So I will copy this path and come back to Visual Studio and paste it in the location over here. Now I also want to give the project name, and we are creating a project to, a CRUD operation for students. So we'll create students, we'll edit students, delete, and also view all the students. So I'll call it student portal. So student portal. So I can have the project name as student portal.web and the solution name as just student portal. So with those changes, I can now click Next. From this screen, it is asking us to choose the framework that we will use to create this project. And I have a few of the versions installed. .NET 5 is out of support. .NET 6 is still valid because it's the long-term support. 7 is there, and we have the latest and greatest .NET 8 at this moment, which is also a long-term support. So I'll choose that. If it is not available for you to choose, you might have to update Visual Studio as well as installing the .NET SDK and runtime. So I'll choose .NET 8 from here. I will not select any authentication because that's not covered in this lecture. And I will have the remaining settings as default, and I will click on this button to create this project. It might take a few seconds, but Visual Studio has created an MVC application for us, and you can tell that this is an MVC application because you get the default models, views and controllers folder in our project. And also if you go to the program.cs file, which is the main file where we configure everything, we can see that to the services of this builder object, we are adding the controllers with views. So our controllers are over here. We get a default home controller, and the home controller has two action methods. So these are our action methods. We have the index action method and the privacy action method. By default, if you go back to the program.cs file, the default value of the route is set to home and the action method is set to index. So by default, the application will come to the home controller and look for the index method, and when it finds it, it then renders this index view. And how does it find the view? It goes to the views folder, it goes to the home folder because that is the name of the controller and it matches on the name of the controller. So it goes to the home folder, and then it should find two views over here. One is the index view, which relates to the index method over here, and one is the privacy view, which relates to the privacy action method over here. There's another file in the properties folder, which is the launch settings.json file, and it has the launch settings related stuff. So we have the profiles over here. We have the HTTPS profile, which has these two URLs. So if I run my application from this button and I have HTTPS over here, it is basically looking on to this URL. So the server will run and it will load the website on this particular URL. So let's see what we get out of the box. I'll run the website. Our website runs and it goes to the default page, which is home/index. Now it doesn't reflect in the URL over here, it just shows the main URL of the application. But even if I go to /home/index, it should come to this same welcome page. So I'll click enter and it comes back to this page. So basically home/index is the same as the home page like this one. And now if I want to go to the privacy page, because that's another page, if you look at the left hand bottom navigation, it says it will go to /home/privacy. So let's go there, and then it loads the privacy policy page, which then if we come back to Visual Studio, goes to this particular view in the home controller folder. It finds the privacy.cshtml, which is our view file, and then loads this entire view. Now if I want to make any changes, let's say this is an updated view, and save it. Now Visual Studio is automatically hot reloading our application and displaying the changes back to the browser. Now there can be some time that it doesn't work, but then you can always restart your application, but most of the times it should work. So if I come back and look at this view again, it has automatically refreshed the application on the save, and you can see the updated view over here. So now that we have seen what we get out of the box in an ASP.NET Core MVC application, now we will go ahead and create the CRUD operations, which is create, read, update and delete operations on our application. And we'll basically take an example of a student. So we will have a list of students. We will also have the functionality to create a new student. We will have the functionality to view the student details and then edit and delete the student as well. So we will make use of Entity Framework Core to talk to a SQL Server database that we will create in the application as well. And basically we'll perform all these CRUD operations. So let's go back to Visual Studio and install Entity Framework first. I've come back to Visual Studio, and the first thing I'll do is to stop the application. Now we want to install Entity Framework Core because we want to use Entity Framework Core, which is a micro ORM, and we want to talk to a SQL Server database. And Entity Framework Core makes our lives very easy because it handles all the connections, it handles instances, and we are able to talk to tables directly through Entity Framework Core. So the first thing we will do is to install some packages which will install Entity Framework Core. So So I will come over here, right click on dependencies, manage NuGet packages, and over here I will go to the browse section and browse for two particular packages. The first one I will search for is Microsoft.entity-framework-core.SQL Server. So copy that, and you basically can type it as well. So you search it in the browse section and click and install this. The next package that we will install is Microsoft.entity-framework-core.tools, and this will be responsible to do migrations, which is a technique to create a database and basically stay updated and stay in sync with the database and the application. So we will browse and select and install this package as well. Now that we have installed these two Entity Framework Core packages, it is now time to create a DB context class. A DB context class is a class file which acts as a bridge between Entity Framework Core and the database. And using this class and the properties of this class, we will be able to talk to the tables of the SQL Server from our application. So let's create this class. I will create a new folder for this class. So inside the project, I will right click on the project, go to add a new folder, and I will call this data. Inside the data folder, I will right click on this, add a new class, and I will call this application DB context. So I will rename this to application DB context.cs. Press enter to create this class file. Now this class file will basically inherit from one of the packages that we installed. So it basically inherits a class called DB context. And this DB context class comes from Microsoft.entity framework core. And this package was installed when we installed the two packages, that we installed in the last lecture. So click on that, and this will import the using statement on the top. Now we want to create a constructor. So I will press, and after clicking over here, I can create a constructor over here using CTOR, press tab, and it creates a constructor. And to this constructor, I will pass the DB context options. So DB context options of type the context that we have created. So application DB context. Let's call this options, and also pass it to the base class. And this constructor will be basically be using inside the program.cs file, where we will be giving the DB context options from the program.cs file into and injecting it inside the application DB context. And we'll come to that in just a moment. Now that we have constructed the constructor, we will now be basically thinking about what we want to create, read, update, and delete. Basically a table, right? An entity. So for now, let's create a model, and inside the models folder, we will create a new folder called entities. And because this is a small application, in bigger applications, you can have multiple entities. An entity is basically a class that has an identity. So any unique identity, it can be an integer or it can be a GUID, and any class that has a unique identity or ID basically is called an entity. So right click on entities folder and create a new class, and this will be our student identity. So I'll rename this to student.cs. So you can call this our domain model or entity. And inside the student class, we will have a few properties that represent this identity. So first of all, we need a unique identifier. So a property, I will have the GUID property because that's a unique identifier. And I will call this ID. So the first property is ID, which represents the uniqueness of this particular student. Then we can have a few other properties called name. So property public string name. Then we can have an email. So prop is a shortcut, and double tab to create another property. The type is string, and we can have this as email. Then we can have a phone number, so string phone number. And we can have another thing called, maybe they have subscribed to a newsletter or something. Because we are capturing their emails, we can also capture it as a Boolean flag, that are they subscribing to our email or not. So a property of Boolean, and let's say subscribed. So we basically want to capture all these details, not this one, because Entity Framework Core will automatically set this ID for us. So we want to capture from a form, we want to capture the name, we want to capture the email, phone, and is the student subscribed to our, let's say, school newsletter. So we want to capture that using CRUD operations. So now that we have created an entity, we will use this an entity in the application DB context. And the way we use it is also by creating a property. So a property which will be a DB set, because a DB set is basically representing a collection, a DB set, a collection of a particular type. And the particular type here will be student. So it is basically referencing a student collection and a student table, you can say, and the table name over here will be students. And as we know that the application DB context is a bridge between our application and SQL Server, so we can make use of this property called students to basically access and play around with the students table that has been created or will be created soon in the SQL Server database. Now that we have created the application DB context, we want to inject this DB context into our application using dependency injection. And later on, because we have injected this class into our application, we should be able to use this inside the controllers and basically access the tables of the database that we are about to create. So the first thing we'll do is to inject the application DB context inside our application. For that, let's come to the program.cs file. And after this line where it says builder.services.add controller with views, we will inject the DB context. So I will write builder.services.add DB context. And add DB context method takes a type, and the type of the DB context that we are trying to inject is application DB context. So I'll write application DB context. Now it will have the options. Basically, we want to tell the injected DB context which database you are about to create and which SQL Server we are about to use. So we will use the options parameter over here. So options will be options dot use SQL Server, and this again comes from the Entity Framework Core package that we installed. So we will be using a SQL Server, and that is what we are telling the application over here when we are injecting the DB context. The use SQL Server method basically takes in a connection string. So I will first create the brackets and then end this line. But this method, if we start it, it takes a connection string of type string. So I will get the connection string over here from the builder, and we will be writing the connection string ourselves, which goes inside the application settings.json file. So first, let's go to app settings.json file and write a connection string. So after the allowed hosts property, I will put a comma, and then in double quotes, I will write connection strings. And this is an object. So the first connection string, first and only connection string that we have over here, it's a key value pair. So this will be the key name, and I can write this as student portal, and this is the key name, and this will be the key value. So the key value takes in a few things. It takes the server name, it takes the database name, and a few other properties. So the first name is the server. So server for me is server is dot, which is the name of the server that I have installed. And with this name, I am basically able to connect it to the database as well. So if I disconnect it in SQL Server Management Studio, I'm able to connect to the server using the name dot. If you have a different server name, please provide that particular name over here inside the connection string. Next goes the name of the database that we are about to create for this particular project. Now we can say database is equal to the name of the database that we are trying to create. So I'll say student portal DB will be the name of the database I'm about to create. If I come back to the server, if I expand on databases, I don't have anything called student portal DB at the moment. So we want the application to create it for us. After that, we want to tell that the connection is trusted. So trusted underscore connection is equal to true, and also trust server certificate is equal to true. So if I hide that, this is the connection string with the server details, database details, some certificate level, stuff, and some connection stuff as well. So with this, we have created the connection string, and this is what we are trying to pull inside the program.cs file using the key name. So back inside the program.cs file, inside the use SQL Server method, I will say builder. So builder.configuration.getConnectionString method, and the getConnectionString method takes a string which is the key name. I can put this in the second line so that it is more readable. And this basically takes the key name which we have defined in the app settings.json. So copy this key name and don't have a different key name to what you have over here, because then you won't be able to make a connection. This has to exactly match the name over here that you're giving. So this will be how we are injecting our application DB context, and we are telling the application for this context, please use a SQL Server database, and this is the connection string to this particular server and database. Now we have done all the groundwork and we have built all the pipeline to use Entity Framework Core. So now we can run Entity Framework Core migrations to create ourselves a new database and the new table that we are telling inside the application DB context. So this will be the table that we expect to create inside the student portal DB. So for that, we have to come to Package Manager console. To do that, you can come to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and click on Package Manager console. Now inside Package Manager console, we will execute two commands in particular. We will first create a migration and then we will run the migration. To create a migration, use the command add-migration space, and inside double quotes we will write the name of this migration. Because this is the first time we are doing it, I can call it initial migration, and this can be anything in your words. This is just a text, and after that we will execute this command. After this command has been executed, we can see a small change inside the Solution Explorer. We can see a new folder has been added, which is called migrations, and it has a new class file called initial migration with some randomly generated number. If we open this file, we can see there are two methods, up and down. Inside the up method, it is basically some C# language stuff that is telling the application is, and Entity Framework Core is basically handling this all for us, but it's basically creating a table called students with all these columns. And where is this information coming from? It's taking all this information from the application DB context. So we are telling Entity Framework Core to create a new DB set, which is a table in terms of SQL Server language. So we are telling it to create a new table called students, and the student properties or columns will be this. So we need ID, name, email, phone, and subscribed. And this is what is reflected in a C# world over here. So at this moment, we only have created a class file. Nothing has been created inside the SQL Server database. If I refresh it and expand databases, I'm not able to see student portal DB yet. So now the second command that we will run is update-database. And what update-database does is it looks at the migration files generated over here, and it also looks at the database. If it is able to find the database, it will execute what is not executed yet, and it will sync up the database with the project. And if there is a database existing, it will basically sync it up already. So now if I come back and see, it has executed the migration file, and if I refresh this database over here at the server over here and expand on databases again, we should be now able to see student portal DB. And if I expand on student portal DB, we should be able to see the only table, which is the students table over here with the necessary columns. So we have ID, name, email, phone, and subscribed. So now we have created the database with the table, and we have made use of Entity Framework Core to do all the heavy lifting for us. Now the next thing that we will be doing is we will create a new controller and some views for ourselves so that we can start focusing on the CRUD operations and make use of this DB context file to do all the CRUD operations for us. If you're watching this tutorial so far, I just want your couple of minutes to introduce you to my ASP.NET Core MVC course on Udemy. This course is a 10+ hour course that is best for beginners, and by doing this course, you will become a master at creating ASP.NET Core MVC applications. This course is a very systematic and structured course, so you don't have to solve puzzles by looking at 1,000 different videos on YouTube. The course includes the introduction and basics, CRUD operations, Entity Framework Core, repository pattern in ASP.NET Core, asynchronous programming, domain modeling, authentication and authorization, multi-role authorization, rich text editor in ASP.NET Core applications, uploading images to cloud image provider, server-side and client-side validations, seeding the database, routing, domain modeling versus view modeling, and so much more. So if you want to become a master, I would love to see you in the course. Use the link in the description for a huge discount. So let's continue now with this video. So let me just quickly close all these files first, and let's create a new controller. So I'll come to the controllers folder, right click over here, add a new controller, and I will be under the MVC. I'll choose a controller, MVC controller empty, click on add, and I'll give it a name. And the controllers always follow with the controller keyword, so I will write students controller.cs because students is the functionality that we are building. We are building CRUD operations for students, and the first action method that we are going to make, or the first web page that we are building, is the add student web page. So first of all, let me change this action method to add, and we will decorate this method with the HTTP GET keyword. And this method will be used when the web page add student first shows up. So first of all, we have created a method inside the students controller. Now I want to add a view for this action method. So I will right click on view over here and add view. Now I will select razor view empty, click on the add button. And over here, we will give it a name. By default, it shows index.cshtml, but we have created the action method called add. So the view name will be add.cshtml, so that the ASP.NET Core is able to relate this action method to the view in the folders over here, and it will find it and then render it. So over here, we will first of all write some HTML so that we can display the add student web page. We'll first start with the heading. So I will create an h1 tag and say add student. This will be the heading for the page. After that, I will use Bootstrap to create different form inputs. So I will create a div first with a class of margin top -3. This will be like a group, and inside this group I will have two things. One will be the label, and the first label will be for the name, because we want to add a student, and let's see the student entity first. We want to get the name, email, phone, and subscribed option, these 4 properties from the form that we are creating in this view. So we will have 4 type of groups over here. So first one is label of name, and I'll give it a bootstrap class form hyphen label. Then this will have an input element which will be type of text because we are capturing a string. I can remove the name and value attributes, and over here I will give it a class as well, form hyphen control. So all of this are bootstrap classes, so nothing fancy going on. So I'll just save it and just run this application without debugging and see how this looks. And we'll also see how we can navigate from the home page to this add students page, because we know that students is the controller name. So this should go to /students/add, which is the name of the method. So the application is running. We will quickly navigate to add students by going to /students/add. And if I enter, you can see that we have loaded the add students web page with 1 form input. So we have a form, we are building it. We just have the name over here, but we will add email, phone, and the subscribed option as well. So let's go back to the project and add a few more controls over here. So we have added the name. Let us add the email as well. So I'll copy and paste it and change the label to email, change the type to email as well, and this will be our email input element. The next one we need is the phone. So phone, we are recording it as a string, so we'll just have text over here. And the final one is the subscribed option, which is a checkbox. So it is slightly different in format. You can go to the Bootstrap website and you'll be able to know how I'm formatting this HTML. But in here, I'll just create a div with a class of margin top -3, similar to this one. But inside here, I will have the input first. So input and type is checkbox. I can get rid of the name and value from here and give it a class form -check -input. And I can give it an ID as well. ID is equal to subscribed. And after that, this will follow the label. So for other elements, label was before the input element, but in here, because we are using Bootstrap, the order of elements are different. So now the label will say subscribed, and this will have a few classes and attributes as well. So class is equal to form -check -label, and then this will be for subscribed. So whatever idea you have given over here, just put it over here, so that if we select the label as well, it will check or uncheck this checkbox as well. So if we save this and look at this, we have hot reloaded our application. If I click on here or here, it works. So the checkbox is working as well. Now we need a button to submit the form. So I will create another div with a class of margin top -3. And then inside that, we need a button. Type is equal to submit. And then we have a class is equal to button space button -primary. Again, Bootstrap classes. And the label for this button will say save. This is a save button. So on clicking on this button, whatever information we have filled over here, we want to record this information and we want to send this information back to the HTTP post method, which we don't have at the moment. So let's create the submit method. So first of all, I'll have it as an HTTP post method, public iaction result add. You can give it a different name as well, but add. And if you give it a different name, we'll have to make some changes in the form. So that's why I'm keeping the name as same, but we'll have to now think about how we are going to access this information over here. So we need 4 things back inside this method. We need the name, email, phone, and subscribed option, so that we can save this information in the database. So for this, view models are helpful. We will basically add a view model over here. We will bind the view model to this input elements, and when the save button is hit or submitted, we will get the information over here and we will get the whole view model with us. So let's first create a view model. So inside the models folder, I will right click, add a new class, and I will call this add student view model .cs, and this will have 4 properties, and I can just quickly copy paste these 4 properties from here, from the student entity, and come back to this view model, paste it over here now, and I can stop debugging because it was already running. It doesn't like that. So I've created a new view model. Now I can go back to the CS.html, and over here I can write @model. And this is how we are binding the model to the CS.html. So @model, now I'll give the full path to this file, which is student.portal.web.models. It's in the models folder. And then we have the add student view model. So by writing this line, we can now access the properties of this view model inside the CS.html over here. So now we can bind this inside this HTML over here using the ASP-for property. And what it will give us is it has access to this view model, and it will give us control space to reveal the properties, and it will give us all the properties over here. So we have the name, email, and we'll also have phone and subscribed. So this input element is for the name. It is there to capture the name information. So I'll say ASP for name. And similarly, this will be ASP-for email. This will be ASP-for phone. Then this will be over here ASP-for subscribed. Once you've done that, let's save it, and we want to access this view model over here. So let's get this as a parameter inside the add method, which is the HTTP post method. So let's say the parameter is add student view model. Let's give it a name. Let's say view model, and let's just return the view itself for now. So we are just returning the view. I'll put a breakpoint over here so that we can see the values, and let's run this application. Let's see what happens. When we run the application, and let's say we input some things, student a1@email.com and some phone number, and maybe subscribed as well. If we click on save, we should get the data back in the controller, but nothing is happening. Even if we click the save button multiple times, nothing is happening because nothing is there. We don't have a form that is getting submitted. So we need a form that encapsulates all of this information, this HTML, and then this button will be used to submit this form. So let's create a form, and I can get rid of the action or method over here. Method is post, and I basically want to take this form element and put it right at the bottom. So basically the form element has all of this HTML input over here. So now if we hot reload our application, because the button sits inside the form, it will actually submit this form, and we should be able to get the debugging point over here and be able to access this information. So let's go back to the browser. Let's put some information one more time. Let's say Samir, some email, and subscribe. Let's click on the save button. We didn't get anything because we are not running it as debugging. So I'll have to stop the application and run it as, with debugging to be able to get this. So the application is running again. You know the drill. Let's go to students and add, and over here, let's just quickly submit some information and save it. And now it comes to the HTTP post method over here. And if we hover over the parameter that is coming in, which is the view model, expand that, we are getting all the information back over here. So we can see that we are able to submit the form and get the information. Now it is time to make use of the DB context file that we created so that we can make use of Entity Framework Core and save this information in the database. So I'll stop the application again and make use of this information. To use this information, we will first inject the DB context class inside the controller. And for that, we'll make use of constructor injection. So I'll create a constructor, CTOR, press tab, and in here I will inject the application DB context. So application DB context, give it a name, let's say DB context, and press Control dot, and this will create and assign this field. And now we will be able to use this field over here. We don't have to new it up because dependency injection is taking care of the instances, and we can just use this DB context over here, and we'll say we'll just make it asynchronous as well. So we'll make it async task of type I action result. This will make it asynchronous, and we'll await on the DB context dot, and we should be able to access the property of this DB context, which is the table, which is the students table. So students, and we have the add method over here. We have the add asynchronous method as well. So we'll make use of that, add async, and it needs the student entity. So we have currently the view model, but we need the student entity, which is this one. So let's create the student entity. I'll create a new student where student is equal to new student, and this student is coming from entities, and it needs a few properties. I won't give the ID because Entity Framework Core takes care of that. I will just give the name, which is coming from this view model over here, and the form. So name is that. Then we have the email, which is coming from view model, then phone, also coming from the view model, and the subscribed option is also coming from view model. So we have now created the student entity. To save, now we'll just pass it to the add async method over here, and that will basically pass this information to Entity Framework Core to save it. But it won't be able to save it before, as this is getting highlighted already. Visual Studio is getting smart enough. We want to save the changes. Nothing is getting saved at this moment. We have to write this line, await DB context dot save changes async. Only when this line is executed, the changes that are not saved yet will be saved to the database. So we'll do that, and then we can return the view. So let's run this one more time, and we should be able to save the student to the database now. Let's go to the students page, and in here I'll create a new student. Subscribed, and let's save this. We have a debugging point which we don't need, so I'll skip that. I'll take it out and just press continue, and it will just come back to the same page. But we now want to check the database. So if I come back in the student portal DB, and let's select on the students table, let's select top 1000 rows, we should have one record over here, and that will be the record that we just created. And that is there right over here. So we have been given a unique identifier by Entity Framework Core. We have a name, email, phone, and subscribed option as well. Whatever information was passed from the form, we have captured it and we have saved it to the database. So this finishes our C, which is creating from the CRUD operation. The next part will be, displaying this information as a list. Now, to create a list of all the students that we have in the database, we'll have to make use of DB context again to retrieve the list from the table. So for that, let's go back to our controller. I will first stop the application, and we have the add functionality over here, but we will now start the list functionality, which is listing all the students. So I want to create a new web page. So I'll create the HTTP GET method. I'll say public async task of type I action result. I'm making this method async because we want to make use of DB context to retrieve the list from the database. So I async task of I action result, and then I'll call this method list, and over here we will utilize DB context. I will say await DB context dot students dot to list async. So this way we are getting the list back. So I'll store it in a variable. We'll say students, and now we have students. We want to pass this students model into a view. So let's create a view for list. So I will come over here, right click and add view, razor view empty page, click on add, and over here I will rename this to list because the name of the method that we are creating is list. So list.cshtml, click on add, and in here we will basically use a for loop now because we have a list of students. We'll create a for loop and display the students. So first of all, I'll create the heading. We'll say students. You can say all students if you want to, and then we will create a table. This will be a bootstrap table. If you are unsure of the classes that you want to use, you can go to Bootstrap website and see the information from there. So table, we will have a t head, and t head will have a single row with th. We want to show the ID, name. Let's say we have ID, name, and maybe email as well. And after that we'll have an action button over here. So I'm creating another th, which will be empty for now, but after the t head I will have a t body. Inside the t body I want to create a for each loop. So I want to create every row for every record that is present in the table. So a for loop, so at for, and or actually a for each, so at for each, and we want to specify the collection to run this for each loop on. So I want to specify the model that we are using. So at model will become, let's go from the beginning, student portal dot web dot models dot entities dot student, and it's a list of students that is coming in. So I will wrap this in a list. So it's basically the model is a list of students, and this collection will now become model because the model itself is a list of student entities. So now we can rename this item to say student, and we want to display each row for each student. So tr, and every tr will have a few tds. The first will be ID, so I can say at student, I'm making use of this variable over here, dot property ID. Then same thing at student dot name, and finally we have at student dot email. And after that we will create another item over here, which will be like an edit button. We will take you from here, from this list page, to a separate page so that you can view this student, and you can edit the student and you can delete the student as well. So I'll quickly create an anchor button and say edit. We won't have much information here at the moment, but we'll come to that soon. So I've created this page, and from the students controller I have this get item. Now I also have the view, so I will say return the view, and I want to pass this collection to this view, so I can easily give this collection to the view method. So save that. Now our list is ready. What we can also do is we can add a quick link to this page from the layout page like we have for home and privacy. So inside the views, inside shared, we have the layout page, and we will have let's say over here we have the home page and the privacy page. So let's also create a page for students. So I'll copy and paste this and just change the controller name is students and the action name is list. and you can say all students, because this page shows you all the students. So now it's time to run this application. So start this. The application is running and we can see all students in the navigation bar, and all students should take us to students/list. And it does that, and when it does that, it goes to the get method, it takes the DB context and it retrieves the list of students that are present in the students table in our SQL Server database. So right over here, and if we want to test this out, we can quickly edit it and add another student over here. So let's do that. I don't have a GUID with me, but I can quickly go online. I quickly went to the online GUID generator and have a new GUID, and let's say this is John and John at email.com 222. This is 0 for false. We have saved a new student in the table. So if I refresh this list, we should get 2 students now, and that is right. So we are getting the list back from the database, and this is what the read in the CRUD stands for. So we are reading and creating students now. The next thing we will do is we will link this edit button so that it takes us to the edit page, and we'll be able to see more information of the student, like the phone number and the subscribed option. We'll be also able to change that information and save it or update it, and we'll finally build the delete method. But first, let's create a new page and link it to this edit button. So let's come back to the controller. I can now close the layout page as well, and the list page, this view model, and add page as well. So inside the controller, I will create a new web page for the edit option or update option. So let's create the HTTP get method first. Public async task of type iActionResult, and this will be, let's say, edit, and edit will take a GUID because the edit page wants to show the information of one particular student. When you click on the edit button of a particular student, we will retrieve the information again. There may be some changes in the database, so we want to get the information again and display it. So as part of the edit parameter, we will get a GUID because that's the unique identifier for the student, and let's call it ID. Now we will make use of DB context again to retrieve this unique student. So let's say await DB context dot student dot find async, and find async takes the unique identifier, which is ID. Now we will store this information in a variable. So this is the found student. Now the information, if I hover over the student, you can see that the student is a nullable student. Now this information of the student, this could be a student, an actual student, if we were able to find it using this ID, or if the ID passed was a junk ID, or let's say a student ID that doesn't exist in the database, then the student will be null. So we will have to make sure we know this information. So once we get this information, we will return it to the view, but we haven't created a view yet. So let's create the edit view. So right click on this button. Oh, I have to stop the application first. Make sure you do that. Right click and add a new view. We will rename this to edit because the action method is edit.cshtml. Now over here, this view will look quite similar to how we have the add page. So to save some of my time and yours, I will go to the add.cshtml. I will basically, let's say, copy all this information, come to edit, and paste it. Now we will just change this HTML based on what we want. So let's change it to edit.student as the heading. We will also reference the model. So at model, and this comes from student portal dot web dot models dot student inside entities. And we will want to show the ID as well. So the first thing that we will show is the ID, and let's change this ASP4 to ID, and also the label to ID. We will also change this to a read only attribute so that we are not able to change it. And we will have the second as name. We want to show the email, phone, and subscribed option. So all this stuff is quite similar to how we had in the add method, but this time this student model, we are actually passing an actual student information inside this form to display it. And again, we are reading it when this button is pressed, this form is submitted, and we are reading this changed information to update it in our database. So once this HTML is done and somebody changes its information and presses the save button, we want to capture this inside the post method. So let's create the post method. HTTP post public async task of type I action result. I'll call it edit, and the edit method is getting the student. So student model, I'll call this student or model, let's say view model. Now we want to make use of DB context again. We would want to first retrieve this student from the DB context. So I'll say await DB context dot students collection dot find async, and we pass the view model dot ID that is coming in. Now we capture that information in here. So var student. Now we first check if student is not null. That means we actually are working with a real student that we have in the database and not some junk value. Then we update this information. So student dot name is equal to view model dot name, and then we also update the other values over here, like the email, then the phone, and finally the subscribed. So now we have updated all the information over here, only when the student was not null. And then whenever that's done, we will use the await DB context dot save changes async method to update this information in the database. Now when the save is done as well, we can just return redirect to action, and let's say if they use the action value, yep, and the controller name as well. So we'll give the action value, we'll pass it back to the list. So I'll say list, and the controller name is students. So whenever the update is successful, we are returning back to the list of students, and you'll see the new updated values over there in the list. So it's now time to test it out, and we can do one more change as well. We have the edit.cs HTML, and we know that, you know, when we are getting the student, this could be a junk value, a junk ID, and your student is a nullable type, so you may not get the student in the view. So it's a good option to check it over here. So we'll say at if model is null, then we want to display some information. We can go and show a bootstrap alert, but for now I'll just say I'll just display a paragraph and say no student was found with this ID, right? And we can put the other thing in an else block, and else all this information that we have over here. Well, actually I'm mixing some languages, but we'll say if model is not null, right? So we have all this information and we are saving this. Well, it will be better not to use this, but to use just else directly, because we don't need the @ sign over here. It's already in the C# syntax. So let me format this really quickly using Control KD. So now we are showing all this information and we want to see this form, and somebody submits this updated information. We want to capture it and update it. So it's now time to test the update functionality. Let me run the application. So the application is running. Let's go to all students. Now we want to connect the edit button to the edit page. So what we can do is we can come back to the application just quickly, and in the list.cshtml, so let's go to students folder, list.cshtml. In here we will say this is ASP controller, and this should go to the students controller, and ASP-action is the edit one, and there's also a route which is the ID. So we also want to get the ID of that. So we want to say ASP-route-ID is equal to, and we want to give the ID as part of the route in the link. So at student.id. And let's save this. We can also give it a bootstrap class. So we can say class btn-primary or anything that you wish. Now we have saved it and we'll come back. It looks like a button. If I hover over it, you can see in the bottom left hand corner over here, it's going to /students/edit, and then the unique identifier for this particular student ends with 19A. And if I come over to the second row, if I hover over the edit button, it shows the unique identifier of the second student. So it's passing the correct ID to the next page. So if I come over here, click the edit for John over here, let's click edit. This is now going to the edit student page. You can see it in the browser over here as well in the URL. It's showing the ID, it's showing the name, email, phone, and subscribed option as well. And that's, we have done it already. So now if I want to change this information, let's say I click the subscribe button and type 333. So I've updated a few information in here. Let's click the save button, and this should update this information in the database. So click the save button. It redirects back to the list of students. We can't see the changes because we didn't make a change to the name and email. But if we go to edit, you can see 333 and subscribed was changed. And I can also change the email to say John Doe, and name is John Doe as well. So save that. It should reflect in the list over here. Right, so this is going on really well. We have finished creating, reading, and updating students or entities. Now the only thing left, and that is super easy to do, is to delete it. So if the user goes to the edit button, sees this information, and say we should have a delete button over here, so that when a user clicks it, it deletes the student and goes back to the list page. So this is what is next. Let's go back to the application, stop this, and we want to create a new action method. So we will create a new HTTP post method. So HTTP post, and we'll say public async task of type I action result, and we will call this method the delete method. And delete method only takes the ID. It doesn't need anything else. Well, actually we have the model ourselves. So we have the student model, so we'll just make use of that. So student view model, we get the information inside here, and we will make use of the DB context. So we will say var student is equal to await DB context dot students dot find async, and give the ID. So view model dot ID. And after that, we will just check if the student is actually, a valid student. So it's not null. So student is not null. and if it was not null, we want to delete this student. So we'll say db context dot students, and we can make use of the remove method inside students and pass the student entity, which is right over here, which is our view model itself. So use the remove method, and then we want to save it. We want to reflect the changes in the database. So we'll say await db context dot save changes async. And finally, when all of this is done, we want to return and redirect back to the list. So I can copy this line and paste it over here. So after everything has been done, we will redirect back to the list page, and we should see one less record over there. So we will now create the delete button inside the edit.cs HTML. So in here we have a single button. We will copy that and paste it one more time. I will rename it to delete. And we can also change the class from primary to danger to make it a red background, and also give it a margin left or margin start of 3. And we will have two different properties or attributes this time. We will say ASP-action, and we will also have ASP-controller. We want to go to a different action method this time. We don't want to go to the edit action method. We want to go to the delete action method. So the controller name is students and the action name is delete. So when this button is pressed, it will actually come to the delete method. When the updated or the update method button is pressed, it will come to this HTTP post method. So let's run our application and see this in action. So we'll go to all students and we'll click on any one of them. Let's quickly check if the edit is still working. So I'll save that and come to John Doe again. It's still working. Now I want to delete this particular student. I'll press on the delete button. We get into this error, and that says the instance of student cannot be tracked because another instance with the same key is tracking it, and we get the error when it's trying to remove it. So basically what Entity Framework Code does is it's tracking this entity behind the scene, and it's unable for us to remove it because it's tracking it. So we can do two things over here, or we'll have to make two changes over here. I'll stop the application first. I'll change this from find async to first or default async, and this uses a lambda expression. So x such that x dot id is equal to view model dot id. So this is the same thing as before. It's basically getting the id, a student based on their id. And before that, we want to also introduce as node tracking. So we don't want Entity Framework Code to track this entity. So we'll say dot as node tracking. And what this will do is it'll not do any tracking, and we should be able to delete this student now. So I'll run the application again to test it. We'll go to all students. We'll go back to the same student that we want to delete, which is the second one. Click on edit. We'll go to delete and press delete. And now we are able to delete the student, and we only have one in the list over here. So this completes the delete functionality as well, and we have finished all the CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete. And these are the key functionality to any web or API application. So make sure you go through the concepts again, and you revise all the concepts.